A journal article is a shorter piece of academic work, usually between 4 and 40 pages, that a historian submits to an academic journal or a peer-reviewed publication. It's short, it's to the point, and it's probably the most common citation you'll ever need to know. When it comes to creating a citation for a journal article, you actually need to create two different citations. The first is a footnote, which is something you'll use over and over throughout the course of your essay to indicate specific pages. The second is a bibliography entry, which is used once at the end of your essay in order to indicate that the journal article as a whole was used at some point in the essay. Because I always recommend doing all of your footnotes first, before creating a bibliography of just those cited texts, we're going to begin with the footnote entry. Now, unlike a book, a journal article is part of a publication rather than a publication in its own right. And this is true whether or not you're using a hard copy journal, such as this one, or an electronic PDF that you find on a journal's website. The basic idea of what a journal is the same. So, what is a journal and how is that different from an article or a book? Well, a journal is what we call a periodical publication. That means that it is published periodically or at regular intervals. Now, most of the publications that are periodical that you're used to dealing with on a day-to-day basis are things like newspapers, which are published every day or every week, and magazines, which are usually published every month or every other month. An academic journal is like that. It has a single title, in this case history, for every single copy, no matter how many times or for how many years it has been published. But each publication, every monthly or quarterly version of it, is its own object. So if you are citing a journal article that appeared in a journal, you need to indicate not just the name of the journal, but the name of the particular copy, the particular issue of that journal that your article is in. Otherwise, it'll be really confusing and really difficult for your reader to find the specific thing you're referring to. So how do we get the information we need? Well, for the footnote, we need 3 types of information. Information about the article, information about the journal, and information about the page we're actually citing. So let's start with the article itself. If we open up this journal, and you'll find this on websites for journals as well, you'll find a table of contents. Now, a journal is an institution. It is not an individual person, and it's not really a publishing house in the same way. It is someone who provides access to individual journal articles. And as such, all the different articles within a journal are usually written by different people, not just within that issue, but across all the issues, across all the years it's been published. Now, there are 2 types of articles that are in most journals: articles and reviews. Now, the way you cite them is identical, but they are different types of things. A journal article is usually a piece of independent original research, whereas a review is another academic or specialist commenting upon or giving a review of a book or a journal article. So let's look at an article to get the information we need. So as an academic who is studying the media, I'm particularly interested in this first article, Bob Harris's England's Provincial Newspapers and the Jacobite Rebellion of 1745 to 1746. Now, in some tables of contents, they'll only have an abbreviated title. So it's important we go to page 5 and make sure that's the full title, the title that you find actually on your PDF if you're looking at it electronically. England's Provincial Newspapers, Jacobite Rebellion, and the dates. So yes, this is the full title and the full name of the author. So we can actually just stay on this table of content page to get all the information we need. So the name of the author is Bob Harris, And because a footnote is like a sentence, it's a little bit of extra information that you give to your reader, we put his name the way you would in a normal sentence, the way you speak about somebody, Bob Harris. After the name of the author, you insert a comma, and this indicates that we are moving from the author into the title. Now, because a journal article is only part of a publication, it is a set of pages within a wider object, you do not put it in italics the way you would a book. To indicate to your reader that it is part of a larger whole, you put it in speech marks. Now, whether you put it into single or double speech marks can sometimes depend whether or not you're in the United States or in the British Commonwealth. Generally speaking, however, if you're using Chicago, which is the Chicago University Press, an American institution, you will use double quotation marks. Now, inside those quotation marks, we simply put the title as it's written here. England's provincial newspapers and the Jacobite Rebellion of 1745 to 1746. Now you'll notice that I did not put in a hyphen between these two dates, and that's because for a date range, saying from one date to another, you don't actually use a hyphen like this. That's a minus symbol. It's used for making compound words or for saying one number minus another. For a range, we want to use something called an in-dash. Now, you can insert an in-dash by using the insert symbol function on most processors, or by going online, searching for in-dash, and then finding it and cutting and pasting it into your document. However, if you're using a full-size keyboard, the simplest way to include it is to hold down the left Alt key and type in with the number pad on your right 0150. All the time holding down that left Alt key. When you let go, you've inserted an in-dash, which is just a slightly longer dash and looks a bit nicer. And that way, for people who are less used to reading these essays, they won't get confused that you didn't mean minus, you meant range. Now, at the end of this title, you do put a second quotation mark to indicate the end of the title. And now you need to have a comma. But because this is like an English sentence, we put the comma where you would in a normal English sentence if you were using quotation marks. That's inside the quotation marks. So we put the comma here between the end of the title and the speech mark at the end of the title. Now what we need to do is we need to move from the article information into the publication information. Now the publication information can be found either on the front cover, on the table of contents page, or on the main web page where the links to the different articles are. And we need 4 bits of information about the publication. The first piece we need is the title of the publication. And like a book, this is a whole object, a whole title, a whole run of publications that are called history. So we put those in italics, history. Now you'll notice that there is technically a subtitle for this journal, the Journal of the Historical Association. And a lot of journals will have those. And you are very welcome, it's completely okay to include that in your citation. But if you do not, it's not really that big of a deal, as long as it's clear which journal you're referring to. If there are lots of journals with very similar names, such as the Journal for 18th Century Studies and the British Journal for 18th Century Studies, sometimes having that extra bit of information really can help clarify it. So, the Journal of the Historical Association, we'll include it here just to make it a little bit clearer. After you do the title, you need to insert the volume and issue information. Volume 80, number 258. Now, what do these actually mean? They're not just arbitrary numbers like a barcode. They are information about the publication itself. The volume number is usually representing the year that this was published. And by that I mean how many years the publication has been going on. Usually periodicals will do 1 volume per year. So if you're on volume 4, it's the 4th year that that publication has existed. And in this case, that makes a lot of sense. Volume 80 in 1995 was the 80th year that history existed, being first published in 1916. So we type in just the number. We don't need to add the vol, even though that might exist on some of the electronic versions you look at. In Chicago, we just put the number, so 80. After that, we put a comma, and the comma separates the volume from the issue number. And in this case, we do need to put an abbreviation. So NO, which is the abbreviation for number, full stop, and the number that's listed here, 258. Now, this is actually a really high issue number. Most of the time, you'll only see issue numbers that are normally 1 through 5 or 1 through 10, and that's because the issue number restarts every year. Volume 80 issues 1, 2, 3, 4. Volume 81 issues 1, 2, 3, 4. But this particular publication has not restarted it. So this is the 258th issue all together across all 80 years. And that's kind of interesting to think about. This is the 258th time they've published one of these journals. Once you've entered the issue number, you now need to put the publication date. And just like in a book, you want to put the publication information in its own little house, its own brackets. Now, why do you use semicolons, commas, brackets, and all these different places? Well, it's basically just to give people hints about what type of information is included. If we always used commas or we always used full stops, it might get confusing what was what. But we know that the year always goes into brackets, so once we see the brackets or the parentheses, we know this is the year. So we look here and it says February 1995. Now this is a little bit of personal preference. Technically, all you need to put is 1995 because the February is also kind of indicated in the issue number. But just to be as formal as possible, you should probably put it exactly the way it appears here. So 1995, February 1995, or spring or winter 1995, whichever your particular journal has. Now, at the very end of this, we have completed all the journal information. So we have the article information, the journal information, and now that third part, the page information. Now, unlike a book, we do not just put a comma after this. We use a different symbol. We use the colon. Now, because we've used quotation marks up here, we've already sort of indicated that this is part of a larger whole. But just to make that perfectly clear to our reader, we also use a colon rather than a comma. Again, every bit of help you can give your reader is just that much nicer a thing to do. And we followed a particular page, so let's say page 19. And then a full stop completes our footnote sentence. Now, just like the date range in the title, if we want to include a range of pages, let's say to page 21, we again hold down the Alt 0150 and enter that in dash. If you're doing two pages that are not contiguous, that are not next to each other, you can also use a comma. And what this says is that part of this information came from page 19 and part of it came from page 21, as opposed to the whole of page 19, 20, and 21. Now that we've completed the footnote entry, we want to move on to the bibliography. Now, the bibliography entry is really similar to the footnote, but there are a couple of little differences, and that's because rather than being in a numerical list of where it appears in your essay, the bibliography has a list based on the author's last name, alphabetized. So we want to put that last name first. Harris, comma, Bob. Now, whereas a footnote is like a sentence, a bibliography is like a paragraph with 4 parts: the author, the title, the pages, and the journal and publication information. So let's start with just the title after the author, Harris, Bob, full stop, and then the title of the article, the specific piece of the larger whole. England's provincial newspapers and the Jacobite Rebellion of 1745, alt 0150, 1746. And because the title is its own sentence, its own part of this paragraph, we again put in that full stop before closing it off with our other speech mark. Now the next bit is going to be the publication information, and that appears basically identically to how it appears in that footnote. History, the Journal of the Historical Association, 80, number 258, February 1995. Now the last bit of this is the page information, and you're not including the specific pages you've cited, but the specific pages that the article contains in this particular publication. Now there's 2 ways we can get that. The first is to actually look at the article. It seems to start on page 5 and it goes to page 21. You can also kind of infer that if you just look at the table of contents. So it starts on page 5, the next one starts on page 22, so the page before that would be page 21. So again, we put that colon, but instead of the specific pages we look at, we put the entire page range for that article. 5, alt 0150, 21, and full stop. So there we go. We have a complete footnote for the specific pages we looked at and a bibliography entry for the entire article.